If you walk into a bookstore today or, just scroll through social media for like 5 minutes,
Yeah.
there is one underlying commandment that we all just sort of accept as absolute truth.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the ultimate modern mantra, right? We
Yeah.
basically build our entire lives around it.
We really do. I mean, it's printed on coffee mugs. It's the emotional core of almost every graduation speech you'll ever hear. It's basically the implied bio on every social media profile.
Right. The whole be yourself or live your truth thing.
Exactly. Find your authentic self. We treat the individual ego like this, I don't know, this sacred artifact
Yeah.
we have to constantly unearth and polish and like fiercely protect against the outside world.
Yeah, in many ways, the individual, the independent self is the absolute center of the modern universe. Like the
Yeah.
overarching goal of our entire culture is just self-actualization.
But so back in 2021, an essay by a writer named Su Feng completely rejected that entire idea.
Radically rejected it.
Right. It's a text titled, "The Best Method of Self-Cultivation is to Give Up on Being Yourself." And the author argues that being yourself is actually, well, the lowest level mindset a human being can possibly have.
Which is just such a jarring thing to hear today.
It really is.
Yeah.
He claims that insisting on your own unique identity is the ultimate roadblock to, like, any true freedom or harmony. So our mission today in this deep dive into the source material is to explore a framework that basically tries to dismantle modern individualism, just brick by brick.
And it is a profound departure from conventional wisdom. We're going to impartially unpack this philosophical framework, looking really closely at how the author constructs this argument.
Yeah.
We'll look at the historical consensus he leans on and the really uncompromising conclusions he draws about how human beings ought to exist.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what immediately caught my attention is that Sefang doesn't position this as like his own groundbreaking personal theory, right?
Right. He doesn't claim he just invented it.
Exactly. He argues that this is actually an ancient unified consensus. He brings up the idea that a true saint has no decided opinions of their own.
Yeah, that's a key concept.
Instead, a saint regards the people's opinions as their own, uniting entirely with what he calls the Tao.
And what's fascinating here is how we should probably define the Tao right up front, because it's literally the engine for this entire philosophy.
Good idea.
So in this context, the Tao refers to the fundamental natural order of the universe. It's like the underlying flow and intelligence of all existence.
Okay, so it's bigger than just like a set of rules.
Way bigger. So to unite with the Tao means removing any artificial barriers between you and that natural flow. And to prove that this isn't just some fringe idea, the author synthesizes teachings from incredibly distinct historical and spiritual traditions.
Pulling from everywhere.
Exactly. He wants to show that they all identified the exact same bottleneck to human elevation, which is the individual ego.
It's almost like finding out that the world's top physicists, biologists, and chemists, who all work in completely different fields, just sat down and agreed on one foundational law of nature. But modern society is just completely ignoring it.
That's a great way to put it.
He pulls these really specific quotes to build this unified front. Like, he starts with Jesus Christ, pointing out that Jesus taught his followers they must deny themselves.
Right, literally stating that whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life will save it.
Exactly. And the author doesn't just linger there.
No, he bridges that directly over to Eastern philosophy. He brings in Buddha Shakyamuni, noting that the Buddha defined a true bodhisattva, which is, a spiritually awakened being, as someone who thoroughly understands the fundamental truth of no self.
Wow, so the very definition of being enlightened there requires dropping the ego.
Right. The prerequisite for enlightenment in that tradition is the realization that the separate ego is essentially an illusion.
And then he adds Celestial Laozi, the founder of philosophical Taoism, to the mix. And the quote he highlights from Laozi really gets to the psychological mechanics of this, I think.
It does. It shifts the focus.
Laozi argues that our fears exist purely because we have a self. The text asks, is what we value and what we fear within ourselves. The logic is so stark, like, if you don't regard yourself as a self, what is there left to fear?
That is such a crucial pivot in the essay. It moves from abstract spiritual theory to the actual tangible mechanism of human suffering.
Right.
Laozi is saying that fear requires a subject, You can only be afraid of losing something if there is a you to lose it.
Oh, wow. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so the author concludes that only by valuing the entire world as yourself can you actually be entrusted with it.
But, I mean, this is where the framework presents a massive paradox. Because Refeng explicitly states, only by being selfless can one accomplish himself.
Yes, that line.
How does giving up the self actually lead to accomplishment or fulfillment? If I completely erase me, who is left to be fulfilled?
Well, the author suggests that our modern definition of fulfillment is trapped inside a terribly small paradigm. Think of the ego like a rigid container.
Okay, a container.
As long as you insist on being you, your capacity for joy, success, and fulfillment is strictly limited to the volume of that one tiny container.
Right, because you only get to feel what happens to you.
Exactly. You can only experience what happens to that specific entity. But when you dissolve that container, when you abandon the ego, you are no longer separate from the world.
So you get to experience all of it.
Yes, you suddenly have access to the harmony and success of the entire system. You accomplish yourself by becoming the whole.
Okay, so keeping the container intact actually limits your experience, which, makes sense in theory.
Yeah.
But realizing the self is a limitation on, like, a peaceful mountaintop is one thing. Doing it when your roommate keeps leaving their laundry in the hallway is another story.
Very true.
If being yourself is the root of the problem, how does this philosophy actually survive contact with daily life?
Well, the author provides a very vivid, almost structural explanation for how the ego operates in our daily lives. He uses this really striking contrast.
Oh, the thorns metaphor.
He says that having an ego means living amidst thorns and spears, locked in a state of constant contradiction. But in contrast, having no ego leads to green hills and blue waters, and a clear moon always.
Let's look at the physics of that thorns and spears metaphor for a second. If you think about what a thorn actually is, it's a defensive structure.
Right. It's designed to keep things away.
Exactly. It only exists to protect a boundary. If you have an ego, you inherently require a boundary to define it. I am this, which means I am not that.
Yeah, you draw a line.
And the moment you establish a boundary, you create an edge. When two people interact, and both are fiercely protecting their edges, their preferences, their identities, their need to be themselves, friction is physically unavoidable.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the exact anatomy of conflict the author is describing. Erasing the self removes the edges, which makes that friction basically impossible.
Because there's nothing to rub against.
Right. The text suggests that the solution to interpersonal conflict is not compromise, because compromise still involves two egos negotiating over territory.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of compromise like that.
Yeah, the solution, according to him, is to melt yourself into the other party. If you don't insist on being yourself, the conflict has no surface area to grab onto.
And Schwifeng scales this mechanism up from the micro to the macro in a way that is incredibly direct. Like, he asks a really blunt question. Why do couples divorce?
And his answer isn't what you'd expect.
No. Based on this framework, the answer isn't a lack of communication or financial stress. The root cause is simply that both people want to be themselves.
Right.
It's just two distinct entities demanding space within a shared container.
And he then takes that exact same mechanism and applies it directly to geopolitics. He points to the tensions between China and the United States. Why are these two global superpowers in conflict?
Because both want to be themselves.
Exactly.
And just to be clear to you listening, the author isn't trying to parse out international trade policy here, and we certainly aren't taking a geopolitical stance on this deep dive.
No, we're just impartially looking at his framework.
Right. The text is using this as a structural example of the ego at scale. But wait, it's a fascinating claim. That whether it's a marital spat over who does the dishes or a massive global standoff involving militaries and economies, the root pathology is identical.
According to this essay, yes, the fundamental mechanism of strife does not change with scale. It is always, always the insistence on the individual entity demanding its own way.
Wow.
If an entity insists on being itself, it simply cannot exist in harmony with others or with nature. The author explicitly states that in a collective, if everyone wants to be themselves, it will inevitably be a mess of quarrels and fights.
Because everyone has thorns.
Exactly. Harmony only emerges when the individual parts stop insisting on their own distinct shape.
Okay, but this brings us to the absolute hardest part of this entire framework. It was the immediate question I had when reading this. And to his credit, the author does anticipate the reader having it.
The question of abuse or unfairness.
Yeah. If I dissolve my boundaries, if I melt into the other party, won't I just get trampled?
It's the logical next thought.
What happens if the person I am interacting with is, as the text says, uncivilized and barbaric.
Hmm.
If I erase my ego, am I supposed to just bear the insults and let myself be bullied?
It is the ultimate real-world counter-argument, right? And the
Ah,
author's answer is deeply uncompromising.
very.
To understand his response, we have to go back to his concept of the Tao and the introduction of karma. The text argues that we must trace history to understand why we encounter certain people or situations in the first place.
Because he thinks nothing is random.
Right. In his worldview, nothing is random. If you are facing hostility, it is because a karmic debt must be paid.
And he pushes this to an extreme that is, frankly, very uncomfortable to read. He states, the world is faultless. All faults lie within ourselves.
Yeah, that's a heavy line.
And then he goes even further, writing, no soul in hell has been wronged. I have to push back on this because applying this absolute internal responsibility to the real world is incredibly fraught.
Absolutely.
Think about extreme abuse, innocent victims of war, massive systemic oppression. Is the author genuinely arguing that in these terrible situations, the suffering is just a flaw in the victim's own consciousness?
This raises an important question because, well, that is exactly what he is arguing, and it is vital to understand why he takes this stance, even if it is incredibly difficult to digest.
Okay, why?
The author is establishing a framework based entirely on the absolute fairness of the Tao. For his entire philosophy of surrendering the ego to work, the universe must be functionally perfect.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if the Tao makes a mistake, if the universe is random, cruel, or unfair, then dropping your defenses and giving up your ego is a terrible, dangerous idea. You would need your ego to survive.
Well, that makes sense structurally. The framework actually requires a perfect universe. Because if external circumstances are a blame, then you need an ego to fight those external circumstances.
Precisely. If bad things happen randomly to good people, you need thorns and spears to protect yourself.
Right.
So the only way the author can logically argue for total ego dissolution is to insist on an absolute internal locus of control. The text explicitly states that reality is simply a projection of one's own consciousness.
So you create it all.
Yeah. Therefore, if you are experiencing friction or suffering, it cannot be a mistake of the universe. It has to be a reflection of your own karma.
Which is just a total rejection of the modern psychological lens, you know?
Yeah.
We normally acknowledge that external realities and systems deeply impact us.
It's completely opposite to modern psychology.
The author points out how easy it is to blame the government or our leaders or our circumstances for our problems. But he insists that doing so just creates more thorns.
Right. It's just more ego.
By trusting the absolute fairness of the Tao, you leave everything to the Tao to arrange. If you fight back to assert your ego, you are just feeding the conflict rather than dissolving it.
Your only job, according to the text, is to remain non-attached and abandon yourself. It is a complete surrender of the ego's desire to control or manage or defend its own existence.
Which, again, sounds like a pristine, beautiful philosophy for a monk living alone in a cave somewhere.
Sure, very easy in a cave.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The author, Kuefeng, didn't just write this essay and leave it as abstract theory. He actually put it to the test in an incredibly demanding environment.
He did.
The essay reveals that this entire philosophy was the foundation of an 11-year social experiment.
Yes. So at the time of the essay's publication in 2021, the author had been running this real-world experiment for over a decade.
That's a long time for an experiment.
It is. His explicitly stated goal was to copy the 1,000-year world of the kingdom of heaven right here in the human world. He wanted to see what actually happens when a group of people attempt to live entirely without the individual ego.
It's like a literal petri dish for selflessness. The participants in this community are referred to in the text as Chanyuan celestials.
Right.
And they serve as the living data set for this theoretical framework. But an 11-year experiment means 11 years of daily life, 11 years of sharing resources, making group decisions, and dealing with just, human habits.
And that is exactly where we see the mechanics of insisting on being yourself play out in stark relief.
How so?
Well, if we apply the text's core principles to a communal living environment, the ego doesn't usually manifest as some grand villainous plot, right?
It's not like a movie villain.
It manifests as friction over daily preferences. It is the person who insists on claiming ownership over a specific chore because it makes them feel important.
Oh, I know people like that.
Right. Or it is the individual who demands their personal space be respected in a very specific way, or someone who refuses to yield in a minor disagreement about how the community should operate.
So every time someone says, I want things done my way, or this belongs to me,
Hmm.
they're essentially erecting one of those boundaries,
They're growing a thorn.
growing a thorn.
Yeah.
And in a community designed to operate as a single harmonious organism, those thorns immediately create snag points.
Yeah.
The edges just crash into each other.
Exactly. The community essentially acted as a pressure cooker for the ego. When friction occurred, the philosophy demanded that the individual melt into the collective rather than defend their position.
Yeah, that's tough.
It is. Those who could not do that, those who felt the need to protect their identity, their status, or their preferences, found the environment increasingly intolerable.
Which leads to the results of the experiment. Now, in social science, you almost never see a clean 100% correlation.
Never.
But Su Feng excitedly points out that the results here were entirely binary. Over those 11 years, every single person who insisted on being themselves eventually left the experiment. The friction just became too much.
Right, they couldn't take it.
But conversely, everyone who actually abandoned themselves, who successfully dissolved their ego into the group, stayed.
The community naturally filtered itself based entirely on the presence or absence of the ego. It functioned as a living proving ground for the thorns versus green hills metaphor.
That's incredible.
The people who held onto their boundaries generated conflict and ultimately departed. The people who erased their edges found the sustainable harmony that the text promised.
And that binary result sets up the author's concluding statement, which is just an incredibly bold rhetorical move. He writes, "If what Su Feng has said is not right, then what the God, Buddha, and Celestial has said must be right."
It's quite the mic drop. He completely aligns the results of his modern 11-year experiment with the core teachings of all those spiritual heavyweights we discussed at the beginning.
Right, he ties it all together.
He is essentially saying, the data from my community proves this is true, but even if you somehow doubt my data, are you really prepared to doubt the unified consensus of Jesus, Buddha, and Laozi?
He just traps the reader right between ancient spiritual wisdom and his modern sociological experiment. It's kind of brilliant.
It's a very tight argument.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We live in a world that constantly demands you build your personal brand, find your unique voice, and, fiercely defend your boundaries.
The world basically demands you have an ego.
Exactly. But this deep dive into Su Feng's essay offers a radically different paradigm. It suggests that true freedom, true harmony, and ultimate elevation might only be unlocked by doing the exact opposite. By entirely erasing the ego.
And the value of this framework isn't contingent on you moving to a commune or joining an 11-year social experiment.
Right, you don't have to pack your bags.
Exactly. The text challenges you to look at the thorns you experience in your daily life right now. Think about the chronic arguments you have at work, the recurring stress in your relationships, just the general friction you feel when navigating the world.
Yeah, all those little snag points.
This essay asks you to consider a difficult question. Do those thorns only exist because you are tirelessly protecting your own ego?
It reframes every single conflict. Like the next time you clash with someone, what would happen if you just stopped insisting on being yourself?
It's a terrifying thought.
It really is, because it goes against our deepest survival instincts. But it's also incredibly liberating, It implies that the heavy armor we wear every single day might be the very thing causing us pain.
Absolutely.
Which brings us back to that coffee mug telling you to be authentic. Maybe the most authentic, elevated thing a human being can do is realize there isn't actually a rigid self to protect in the first place.
It shifts the goal from protecting the container to basically becoming the ocean.
I love that. Becoming the ocean. Well, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over on your own today, building on the mechanics of the source material we've explored.
Yeah, let's hear it.
If, as the text insists, reality is truly just a projection of your own consciousness and the universe is perfectly fair, the next time you find yourself absolutely furious at someone else's behavior, are you actually fighting them? Or are you just exhausting yourself in a fistfight with a projection of your own insistence on being yourself?